Our final discussant is Lori Weintrob, who is a professor of history and director of the Holocaust Center at Wagner College in Staten Island. She's recently co-edited Beyond Bystanders, Educational Leadership for a Human Culture in a Globalizing Reality, and Maternalism Reconsidered, Motherhood, Welfare, and Social Policy in the 20th Century. She's written articles on immigration history, social welfare policy, Holocaust studies, for civic engagement partnerships with Liberian refugees, undocumented youth, Holocaust survivors, and Muslim American immigrants in New York. Lori was named Community Builder of the Year in 2003. And she received the Staten Island Borough President Iftar Award in 2017 for collaboration on an exhibit about Albanian Muslims who rescued Jews in the Holocaust. And she received her PhD from UCLA.
Thank you. At a job interview last spring, a candidate for the Global and Islamic History position began his lecture asking students and faculty to write out their answer to this question. What are the first words that come to mind when you say Muslim women? How might you answer this? With only a moment hesitation, I wrote down the following: doctor, teacher, journalist, mother, student. Yet I had just participated the day before on a panel for a theater class on the history of fashion, comparing Muslim women's dress in France, Turkey, India, and Iran. We had looked at a range of images from models on the runway in the modest fashion industry, a $44 billion industry, to women in Bollywood music videos. We discussed, of course, the affaire de voile in France, the debate over wearing the hijab, and much more. In France, the politicization of the veil coincided with the rise of anti-immigrant extreme right party of Jean-Marie Le Pen. The issues at the intersection of Islamophobia, gender, and sexuality are ones we need to raise in modern French and European history courses. They speak to the heart of post-colonial France and gender equality, building on long-standing debates over French identity. However, I will also argue we must take care to avoid falling into the trap set by the media of drawing too much attention to this topic of the veil at the expense of discussing the struggles and accomplishments of Muslim women in France, Muslim women and men throughout French society. In particular, I argue for a community-based pedagogy that asks students to look beyond the classroom to promote intercultural understanding and not only tolerance. I have taught French history with this civic-minded technique for over 15 years, sometimes using François Gaspard's A Small City in France about the rise of the FN in Dreux. At the end of my talk, I will quote from student reflections on these encounters from my book, Beyond Bystanders. To students unfamiliar with contemporary France, the Bikini Ban of last summer is rather shocking. How can political leaders in France, from the prime minister to local mayors, see these modest bathing suits as, quote, an ostentatious display of religious convictions, or worse, as a project to enslave women, rather than as a form of cultural expression or personal choice? The French government minister for women's rights, Laurence Rossignol, described it like this: the bikini is the beach version of the burqa and has the same logic. Hide women's bodies in order to better control them. Just want to repeat, this was the Minister for Women's Rights. Ironically, in the center photo, you see French police taking a woman in a bikini off the beach with force, that is, exerting control, the very thing the French state claims it is countering from so-called patriarchal Muslim men and their institutions. It is important to situate the bikini ban in the historical context of the French debate on wearing headscarves in public school, a debate going back 30 years. In 1989, the year of the bicentennial, and again in 1994, school principals took the initiative to expel students refusing to remove the hijab. The educators took a position that exhibition of religious symbols within school walls interfered with the Republican tradition of secularism, or laïcité. Dating back to 1905, laïcité is an expression of separation of church and state, protecting individuals from the claim of religion and insisting that religion must be a private matter. In 1994, Education Minister François Bayrou declared that, quote, ostentatious symbols of religion were prohibited in public schools. This decree was overturned by the courts, who ruled that such decisions must be left to individual schools. In 1999 in Normandy, 70 teachers at 3 schools went on strike to protest a school board decision to allow 2 female Turkish students to wear the veil in the classroom. 2 students, 70 teachers. Finally, in 2004, the government banned the display of any conspicuous religious symbols, and notably the Muslim headscarf, in any public or private schools who receive funding from the state. It passed the Senate by a nearly unanimous vote of 274 to 20, despite considerable protest by Muslim women, which, according to Joan Wallace Scott, was sometimes presented in the press as, quote, revolutionary Islam on the rise. In April 2007, the law was extended to anyone working in public service in France, including social workers, nurses, and doctors. In France, the notion that all citizens are equal often precludes emphasis on religious, racial, or cultural differences. This conflict reflects the French Republican commitment to a universalist discourse of equality rather than a multicultural model as in the United States. As historian Anna Kemp emphasizes in France, quote, minorities must assimilate to the dominant cultural model in order to achieve cultural unity. Such an approach has many critics. In her critique of the overreach of the French state, author Marjane Satrapi puts it this way: the French state has turned a symbol of oppression into a symbol of rebellion. Satrapi, who was educated in Iran and France, is best known as the author of Persepolis, an autobiographical graphic novel and later a film, criticizing the policy of mandatory veiling after the 1979 Iranian Revolution. She thus might be expected to be sympathetic to those who agree with her that the veil is a symbol of oppression. Yet she is more concerned of its impact in France, that it may backfire if Muslim girls are kept home from public schools or sent to more religious Muslim schools. Public Muslim piety is seen as a failure of Republican integration, yet in reality, it may accentuate differences. The state may even appear to condone rising gendered Islamophobia, that is, hate crimes against Muslim women who wear visible markers of their faith. Other scholars have argued that these laws on Maghrebi French women's bodies are in fact a means to reassert the authority of the state. France became the first European nation to ban the niqab, full-face veils. However, if one looks at the actual impact, it only applies to a tiny percentage of French Muslim women. Many of the same women are fined repeatedly, and religious community groups cover their fines. Another critique of the French obsession with Muslim women is that it obscures very real gender and economic inequality. Many Maghrebi women of the first and second generation live in the housing project in the banlieue, the suburbs. They struggle to overcome the disadvantages of poverty and low-quality housing. In this cartoon we read, one burkini and we forget everything: unemployment, Turkey, Putin's election tampering, and pollution. The implication is that it is in the interest of not only the far-right National Front, but even more moderate political parties to play the card of Islamophobia to win points in the electorate. What must we do if we too, as educators, want to avoid following global media in their obsession with the way women dress? We must move beyond the stereotypes and engage with the Muslim community, I argue. This can be done through digital exploration of biographies of a range of Muslim women leaders, reading autobiographies and interviews online, researching economic and political issues affecting Muslims in France, or analyzing films or telefilms are all ways to better understand what is going on behind the rhetoric. To take only two examples, President Hollande appointed the Algerian filmmaker and politician Yamina Beguigui to a ministerial post. She had given a voice to immigrant women for 3 decades in her films and was elected to the Paris City Council in 2003. Her biography, but also her films and many others, capture Muslim women working and negotiating family relationships. Another example is Sarah Zouak. As a political science student, her teacher once told her, "You must choose between being a feminist or being a Muslim." Instead, she launched a media outlet, Lala Lab, and traveled to 5 Muslim countries to identify in each one 5 heroic Muslim women. We must work hard to elevate these more complex narratives rather than the ones highlighted in mainstream media. And just to give an example of a film, Two Ladies from 2008 is on an interfaith relationship of 2 elderly women, Halima and Esther, which gradually forces them to come to terms with both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, one being a Jewish pied noir and the other Muslim. In addition, we can explore sexual citizenship and apply queer studies to understand subgroups of Muslim men and women. Time doesn't permit a full discussion of these films and ways to extend the analysis to Muslim men, masculinity, and homosexuality. So I just take one example from the French scholar Denis Provencher in his books and articles. One, Coming Out à l'Oriental, offers such a window. He captures the journey of one photographer, Tufik, involving his traditional Muslim father in shopping for a headscarf worn when he cross-dresses as Fatima, the pink veil. And this article actually discusses in great detail this outing to the souk with this traditional Muslim father, and it's actually very beautiful about changing your family's opinions about sexual identity. Finally, one way I have chosen to connect students to this issue, to help them understand the appeal of Jean-Marie Le Pen and the Front National, something I came up with when I first started teaching the book about Dreux, and the messages of xenophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, and Islamophobia in France, was to have my students confront their own fears of entering a mosque. I'm just going to read two student quotes that I believe speak for themselves. I think that every student should have the experience of going to a mosque like I did. Everyone came to America from somewhere. Everyone is equally the same. I am lucky I had a chance to take this class. I have learned many new things that I can carry for the rest of my life. It has taught me to be more open-minded. And before this class, Muslim Americans, I did not like them one bit. The media always portrays all Muslims as bad people, so I've always had a skewed vision of them. Taking this trip really just opened my mind not to be so quick to judge people of a certain religion. And I would argue that it's insights like this that carry over into understanding French history and what's going on in Europe. If it's too difficult, as a teacher, to arrange these kind of direct civic engagement experiences, another alternative is to bring panels of Muslims or speakers to the campus, which I have done as well, and just sort of a practical application that Staten Island and Manhattan are both places where there have been very contentious issues over the placement of mosques, and actually, because of that contention, it has failed. So I would argue that work like this has a very immediate practical implication in terms of countering the kind of visibility of Islamophobia with more positive representations of Muslims in New York. So, so to conclude, as Sarah Zorak would say, we must study how women grow not despite but because of their multiple identities, and link this issue of woman, gender, and sexuality to economic and political inequality, to this idea of interviewing or somehow encountering one-on-one actual Muslims and not just the ones that are negatively portrayed in mainstream media. And we must find these other ways to make this part of our regular teaching, whether it's French history or European history courses, immigration history. I try to teach it in as many classes as I can, and it's really had amazing results that I think really help us think about both national identity, personal identity, sexuality, and so on. So, thank you. Oops, a little over.